Hello, and welcome back to another episode. This is John Gulick with Storysmithing, and this is an episode that I've been really excited for all of about 30 minutes. Just had an idea and wanted to see how it kind of panned out in the episode. So, just to give you a little bit of a background, the morning crew is currently occupied with the last story that we brainstormed, which was an unbaroned castle. The writing has been going really well. I've been enjoying it a lot. It's a very different perspective or different tone of a story than the pre-battle Trimmers, which was very lighthearted. This An Unbarren Castle story is much more of a serious story with elements of humor, but the backdrop is more serious. It's more the themes are a lot deeper and a lot more complex, and for my purposes, the story is a lot longer as well. I the plot for it, the little outline that we generated over about 4 hours, was something like 20 or 30 bullet points, and I just finished the first bullet point. Just finished writing, the actual story of the first bullet point, and we're at about 2,000 words. So, it's mapping out over quite a few pages. I know that plot outline point to word count in the finished product is gonna lessen as we go on. There's kind of a lot to pack into that first plot point that I've been writing the last week or so. But just to give you an idea, my writing focus kind of for the near future is on that An Unbaroned Castle story. So what I'd like to do today, or what I thought I wanted to do today, is to do something that isn't going to necessitate future writing. So I want this to kind of be a self-contained episode or part of a series of self-contained episodes that isn't going to demand any writing outside of this. With the goal being that I can continue to focus on another story. This is also, as I'm still kind of building up to our general focus today, but what we'll be discussing today is something I've really been looking forward to as well, for a long time, not just the last half hour. So what I'd like to do today is shift our focus a little bit away from a flash fiction piece or something like that to a different medium, which is going to use a lot of the same skills that we would use in creating a short story, or even this maybe 10 to 20,000 word piece that I'm working on right now, which is a video game. So I'd like to think a little bit and brainstorm a little bit about creating a video game. This is going to be a bit more abstract rather than actually sitting down and doing some programming and using an engine like Unity or something like that. I have a bit of experience with that, but certainly not enough to pan out hopefully the ideas we're going to come up with today. So the goal, like I said, is to select a genre for a video game and then begin to build some ideas of how that would work, what would be fun mechanics, what would be fun gameplay loops that that we as the player would enjoy. And the goal of that is that this is going to rub elbows a lot with many of the checkboxes that you're going to encounter when you're world building a story. So building a world for a game is going to be similar to building one for a story. And finding fun things to do in games might not be a one-to-one comparison for finding entertaining sequences in novels or in stories. But I think they're cousins. They're certainly related somehow. And it should just be fun to talk about video games for a while. So that's about all I've thought of so far. For the previous couple of episodes, I had a general idea for pre-battle Trimmers. I knew the story would sort of follow a few people that were preparing a battlefield. They were kind of cutting the grass and moving trees and stuff so that a place was ready for battle. For an unbarren castle, I knew it would have something to do with kind of the assumption of power after this baron figure has died. For this, I really do not have a lead on what kind of video game I'd like to do. At some point, I think I'd certainly like to take a shot at building a large scale world. Skyrim is one of my favorite games, and it's kind of a masterful example of a well-built world that allows the player to make full use of the world. I think it'd be really fun to take a shot at doing something like that over the course of many episodes. I don't know if we want to start that today, though. That in terms of scale, Skyrim is about as large as it gets. That being said, I think there's a decent chance we'll talk about Skyrim today because it is one of my favorite games, and there's a lot of really neat elements in there. Other directions we could go. There's a couple neat games that sort of develop around or are formed around the idea of combining different things. So I think there's a game called Little Alchemy that's many years old, but the idea is you have a pool of kind of raw materials, and then you can combine them in different ways and experiment and build something up. So that may be sort of an element within whatever game we come up with. Another one that has been on my mind lately is a game called Pal World. I haven't played it. I've seen about 20 seconds of gameplay. All I know is that it's somehow similar to Pokemon, and it is based on the idea, I believe, of collecting these pals or collecting these different creatures and then battling with them or using them to battle. And then there's some resource, strategically using your resources that you can collect within the world, because it is an open world game, I believe. So there's kind of a blend of things. We could pursue something like a Royale game, something like Fortnite or PUBG or any of these games where a series of players are put into an environment and sort of pitted against each other. This could be something closer to Minecraft, where we try to focus on resource collection, building, exploring, sort of going for like a casual experience. What would be fun? Lots of options. That blank page is always pretty bottomless. Anything we can do here. I do think I want to stay away from the super story of Skyrim, where you have layers and layers and layers of, of possibility and character, exploration and that sort of thing. But open worlds are always really, really fun. I think let's go a different direction. So my goal here is not to get us going down the rabbit hole with something that's going to take, episodes and episodes to kind of flesh out. I want this to be more of a self-contained loop where this can stand on its own. It can be in a vacuum, and, maybe we have a follow-up episode, but we get the gist of it here. Another genre I didn't even mention, too, I guess, would be sort of deck builders, where you go through an environment and you're gradually collecting cards or collecting unique resources that you use in future battles or future events, and then your goal is to accumulate power as you go. It's sort of like a two-dimensional view of the RPG genre, where similarly you're collecting resources and gaining strength. But for the deck builder, that strength is constituted of cards rather than stat points and different armors and weapons and that kind of thing. There's tower defense games we could explore. Lots of options. I do think I want there to be a narrative within the story. So something like a tower defense game typically wouldn't really have a narrative. It's more just a matter of defending something. There's not really a larger scale to it usually. I can't think of an example where there is. Open world games are very easy to implement stories in because every person that's going to cue you towards your next action is doing so through a story. They're saying, my dog ran into the cave, I need you to save it. They're saying, this is a family heirloom that this band of robbers stole, and now they're kind of locked up in this old castle. Can you get it for me? There's always narrative and movement within those open world games. So I'm afraid I'm going to paint myself into a corner here and create an entire world, which would not necessarily be a self-contained episode. But that would be very fun. So I think let's take that angle. We'll see how this pans out in terms of volume. If it's going to take me another couple weeks to finish that an Unbarren Castle story, then maybe we can swallow a couple episodes for building a whole video game world. So I think I want to piggyback a little bit off of the idea with Pal World, because in full transparency, like I said, I've seen maybe 20 or 30 seconds of gameplay. I've read a couple sentences saying that it's similar to Pokemon. It's open world. There's some kind of resource allocation development. And then I also saw building was an aspect in that. I don't know if that's kind of akin to Fortnite building, Minecraft building, how sophisticated that is. But I think it'd be kind of fun to try to create a world or try to create a game that uses some of those same principles, but should be distinct enough from anything else, obviously, since we're creating it from scratch here, not trying to base it off of anything. So, okay, so we've got an open world game. I like it. So that's sort of one of our genre pieces. And I think so the player is going to be able to move freely through there. What kind of a world do we want them to move through? Is it going to be kind of your traditional medieval setting, Skyrim, any of the other Bethesda games like that? Any number of, RPG style games? I guess maybe that's a better question. Is this going to be an RPG where the player assumes the role of, or assumes the, to be a character that is going to get stronger over the course of the game? Can we do something else? Normally open world games are RPG, so I'd like to do something different. It would be fun to reinvent the wheel and do an RPG where we check a lot of the boxes, character progression, strength accumulation, different items of rarity. That's a fun thing to do, to create that. I want to see if we can find a different first principle to try and chase, though, instead of that standard RPG model. So if the scope, or if the goal of our open world story isn't to progress a character, what else would it be? It could be something like progressing a certain area. So I'm thinking of like Stardew Valley here, where there is character progression, but another sideline to progress on is advancing the entire town and hitting certain checkpoints for this town and improving the quality of life for everybody. And that takes, a secondary view other than just increasing the base character's ability to do different things. So we could set up something where the character's goal is not to make themselves stronger, but to improve a village, a town, a city, whatever. That would fit a little bit of the perspective of different city builders or sort of strategic world building games. Thinking of like Civ and Clash of Kings. Is that what it's called? there's any number of them, but where you are sort of the figurehead of a city or of a country, and you get to make the decisions citywide or countrywide to improve things, and you're normally pitted against other countries that are in the same boat, chasing the same apple. Don't want to do that. I like the open world idea, especially because that's going to give us a pretty one-to-one ratio of world building for a novel. We're going to get to do a lot of the same things, practice the same things. So if we have a character moving through an open world and they're not necessarily focused on progressing themselves, it could be a mystery-focused game where they're trying to discover things within the world. I do like that from kind of a narrative perspective of it's going to make us make the world very interesting. If there's things to discover in the world, it's got to be interesting. Our character would have to be, or could be, something like a detective or anyone that has a reason to explore. So it could be a little traveler. I'm tempted to lift an idea from a novel I had very briefly started, which was an attempt to subvert the typical traveler or adventurer story, which is a lot like the RPG. We were just talking about of accumulating power, going on adventures, doing crazy things, being the hero. This is every story we know, right? And in that novel I had started, the main character was a cook, a traveling cook who sidekicks along these, this troop of adventurers who are traveling and doing amazing things. And the main character is just their cook. So his goal or his focus is collecting herbs, purchasing food from any town they pass through, keeping the soup pot warm for when those travelers get back, and then kind of vicariously hearing the adventure through them. So most adventure is going to be secondhand to that character. And I'm tempted to lift that idea here and apply it in kind of a similar way. Because if the main character is a cook, providing for others, it's going to give us a great backdrop for exploring areas, but not being the RPG strength accumulator slayer that the typical game does. And I like if we can keep this closer to PG than to PG-13, as obviously most RPGs are, when you can't save the princess if you don't kill the dragon kind of thing. If we can keep this closer to PG, I think that's great, and that's a great sort of parameter to put on this. There's this really interesting line I heard about boundaries on creativity. You would assume that they actually limit you. So if we put a bunch of barriers on this game, that it's open world, the main character can't hurt anybody, the main character can't progress anything, progress themselves stat-wise, the main character is a cook, all these things, you would assume each time we layer something on, it narrows our view, or it narrows the view of possibilities. But it seems like it's almost the opposite. Of the more specific we get, the more we actually create, and the more possibility we have. I heard, who was it? Jordan Peterson, I believe, cite this haiku research on haikus done, that there was a study done or something about people that had to write a haiku, write 3 lines, 3-line poetry about Spam, the food, and thousands and thousands of these haikus. I want to say like 26,000 haikus were submitted for this. And you'd think there's nothing to say about Spam, especially in 3 lines. How many different ways are there to say something about spam in 3 lines? Many, apparently. So good example of limited parameters don't really affect the output of creativity. So where were we? All I have on my notes is open world genre. If our character is going to be a cook, I'm not opposed to using a similar setup to that novel I started. Of the character's goal is to progress the people in their party, to provide for them, to refill them. And the character's goal is not themselves, which I like. I'm trying to think, how do we want to incorporate difficulty or reward into this? In any game you play, you want there to be a barrier of some kind that you need to pass. That's a satisfying thing of playing a game, is learning how it works or improving your but improving your ability to do something within the game. Whether that's a shooter and your precision gets better, whether that's a puzzle in Skyrim and you finally figure out how, the sequence of traps to trigger to pass the puzzle. There's got to be complexity and difficulty in it. We don't want this to be an Elden Ring where the baseline is that you will fail and fail and fail, and then your 1% success rate is extra satisfying because of that. I don't want that, but I do want there to be some degree of difficulty or wonder or of just reward. So different options that could be. There could be we could play the slots here, where part of the character's day-to-day is collecting herbs and things from the forest. So there could be, hold on. Oh, okay, I think we got it. Here we go. I like this a lot. So I want to incorporate rounds into this open world game. And let me make some notes here before I sideline myself and lose track, because this sounds really fun. Okay, round 1, resource collection. Round 2, food prep. Round 3, dinner. Okay, that might sound like baloney, but let's think about this. So, how could we incorporate rounds into this game? I think back to the main point of let's develop some exploration in this game, right? One of the most fun things about Skyrim, about Minecraft, about Elden Ring, about, I assume, the later Pokemon games, all these things, is that there's this big world and you get to run around in there. You get to poke at things, you get to see if you can cut the trees down, you get to see if the NPCs talk back to you. You get to explore in a safe way. One of my favorite quotes that I just read about reading, and this was in Janet Barroway's writing fiction. She may have quoted it from somebody else, but it was something along the lines of, actually, I think this was Faulkner that said it originally, but reading allows us to experience things without paying for them, or it allows us to experience emotions without paying for them, to experience almost memories. We get to see a wider world than if we hadn't, and we're none the worse for it. George R. R. Martin says a similar thing, something like, the person who's read 1,000 books has lived 1,000 lives. The person who hasn't lives only one. Something like that. So how did I get on that sidetrack? Okay, so lots of games have exploration. We want that. That's the baseline of our open world game, and I think how we get there is allowing the player, who is the cook, to explore forest, city, caves, wherever the players are, whatever checkpoint the players are on their journey, the player can explore there and collect different things. So if they're in the forest, they might be collecting herbs, certain, you always hear like willow bark being medicinal. Just collecting things from the forest. Maybe even, if we wanted, we could incorporate a sort of hunting element. I don't know if we want that. Actually, I don't think we do. I think we want to lean into this theme, which I think is building. I don't want to sideline myself right now and talk about it too much, but so the forest would be a location, millions of things to collect in there. There could be a city, after these adventurers that the cook is coupled with complete a mission. They're going to go to a city to turn in, the dragon scales that they collected or the family heirloom that they saved. So for the city, the cook could be purchasing things. We could create kind of an economic system that would be entertaining and fun to play with. So city purchasing, we could expand this person's role a little bit from being a cook to also being like their, purchasing not just food, but, clothes sounds a little mundane, but like any resources that the party would need, like repairing armor or finding leads on new jobs. Okay, so the city would be another environment. Above that, I'm going to put a cave. Could be, and I'm just living in Skyrim right now. The cave could have mushrooms and mosses, pools. Okay, so if I'm really tempted to get a fishing mechanic in there because fishing is super fun. I think fishing is safe or isn't at odds with sort of the casual, relaxed, playful theme we're going for, right? Hunting down a deer and shooting a deer in the game would be a little more towards the violent end. Fishing can be pretty kid-friendly, within a video game. The cleaning and the killing of the fish and that sort of thing doesn't normally make it into the video game. You just pull them out of the pond and then they're ready to eat. So fishing mechanic would be very fun, and that's always a great mini game that I enjoy within games. Like Stardew Valley especially has a very simple fishing mechanic, but it's really fun. So forest, cave, city, we can keep fleshing that out, but for round one, like I said, the baseline is resource collection. So, and this would be on a timer as well, I should note. So, could be on a timer. I'm imagining sort of in Minecraft, there's this survival mode and then creative mode. There could be a similar thing here where the timer, if there's a 10-minute timer to collect all the resources you need to for dinner that night, then there's that time bomb, or there's that timer that is going to drive you to try to be efficient, try to be optimal. That makes it very satisfying when you can get everything you need, and it creates a sense of urgency when you can't. And then there could be a separate game mode without a timer, which would be leaning more into the casual, relaxed 5-year-old or 10-year-old Minecraft experience. So, round one, resource collection. We're a cook. We're coupled with these various travelers, and we need to get dinner ready. So we're going out. We're finding everything we can. We're trying to supplement meals with different herbs and all that sort of thing. Round two, we had noted as food prep. Yeah, I like that. So food prep. So now we're going to take the resources that we've collected And maybe, oh, here we go. I'm going to create another header for sort of gameplay mechanics. And in there, we're going to want an inventory system. Maybe let's call it the pantry system. So for round 2 food prep, we're going to add all the things we collected that day to our base stock, which we're calling the pantry system. So let's assume you start the game day 1 and the party had just hit a city and you're stocked up. You've got salt, you've got different tea leaves, you've got dried salted meat, a good list of kind of baseline things that you would need for being on the trail for a week or two. You add anything you gained in round 1 to your base stock, and then from there you're able to make dinner. Another gameplay mechanic that makes sense to me would be varying food preferences based on party. So if you're traveling with a band of, let's say, knights, I don't want to strain too hard at this point for kind of our tropes or character sets that we want to play into. But knights would probably like a meat-heavy meal, right? They're larger, typically, physically larger than something like a ranger. If we want to lean into kind of like the stereotype, which I think we do for a game like this, especially one, right? We're keeping this very much PG. This is kid oriented. We don't want to introduce too much complexity in our character. So to create a knight that loves poetry and is very maybe kind-hearted can still be in line, but is extremely gentle. Flips a little bit of the typical knight that a kid would maybe expect and hope to see within a game like this. So for our knight, we probably want them to trend more towards, big, strong, large weapons, maybe a little bit of a meathead, semi-unintelligent. That can be a fun angle, especially for a kid who is expecting that. But anyway, back to the gameplay mechanic that our foods can vary with the characters in the party. So knights may prefer meat and larger volumes of food. Let's say there's an elven, is that a word? Yeah, elven archer. They may really appreciate teas and like greens. That's not how you spell green. They may prefer teas, greens, any light food. We don't want to go full Lord of the Rings here and give them whey bread, but just leaning into that light, sort of delicate food would satisfy the elves. And we could flesh that out, right? There could be 20 or 30 characters, each with different food preferences. And maybe those preferences change over the course of the game, but to saddle our character, the cook, with a collection of these adventurers introduces the challenge of how do I make food that satisfies all these people? That's a challenge, right? Because you need to be flexible. You need to do more planning and more preparation to figure out how are you going to satisfy everybody. We'll see if we ever get through my explanation of the rounds here. I've got another idea which would be fun for our gameplay mechanics, which is that the adventurers are successful to the degree that they are fed, or let's say that they are satisfied. And not one-to-one, but what I'm thinking here is our gameplay loop is round 1 resource collection, round 2 food prep, round 3 dinner. The next day, let's add a round 4. which is going to be like night or / next day. Round 4 is what happens prior to, well, I guess actually, I was going to say round 4 would be what happens prior to the next resource collection. We really don't need that because when the cook is collecting resources, the group is going to be adventuring. They're going to be fighting the bad guy. They're going to be doing things. So we could have a round 4 night where it just progresses, and it could be a Stardew Valley type thing where a little screen comes up and tells you how successful you were at various metrics. I'll just leave round 4 night in our outline right now. But what I was thinking is for this gameplay mechanic, adventurers are successful to the degree that they're satisfied. Meaning that, let's say you as the cook prepare a great meal and it's got the proper amount of meat for the night. There's a side of greens for the archer for the elven archer that they love. Everybody really likes it. That next day, the team is going to be primed for success, and there's going to be a very high chance that they'll succeed in whatever task or quest they're on. If we had prepared a poor meal, meat was rotten, all this sort of thing, maybe the knight's sick, so he doesn't even go on the quest, but the other party members would perform poorly or more poorly to the degree that the meal was bad, which would mean that there's a lessened chance that they would succeed on the quest. I think that's a fun feedback loop because it provides some stakes for creating a good meal. So I do like that. And then I was just having an idea. We further can reinforce so let me find an analogy for this. I want to further reinforce or create more stakes for creating a good meal, right? Because that's the challenging objective of our cook, is to create a good meal and prepare the team for success. I want to make more stakes than just there's a higher or lower chance they'll succeed tomorrow. I want there to be a long-term goal. And 2 ideas are coming to mind. One would be, and we'll have to think about this, but I just want to write it down, stat evolution for the party over time. So I'm picturing if the knight gets a cut of T-bone every night, maybe his health and his strength and that sort of thing is going to improve over time. This is what happens in the real world, obviously. And those greater stats would improve the baseline chance of success for future missions. And that also makes sense, right? If the knight is twice as powerful, there should be about twice the chance of success on most missions that would be based off of the knight's strength. That goes a little bit back to the RPG mechanic that we were kind of trying to avoid for the sake of subverting the main open world RPG genre. This is a little bit different because we'd be improving the stats of the people in our party, not our cook, which is pretty similar to improving the nearby town, like in Stardew Valley or whatever. So I'm not necessarily opposed to this idea that we as the cook can make long-term change with our characters. The flip side of that, obviously, being we make a bunch of poor meals, their stats actually decrease, and they get worse and worse, lessened chance of success until they're can't find work anymore because they're so bad. Okay, so that's one idea that we can build a stat evolution into this. The other, and this is what I was thinking about earlier. Hope it comes back to me. Something about long-term effects that our meal would not only have a greater or lesser chance of success on the following quest, but long-term. Oh, here is something like this. So our party needs to be able to move through the world Right? This is an open world game, so I mean that literally. They need to be able to move through the world, but also with status and prestige, there needs to be a vertical element to this movement as well. That the more successful the party is, the higher stakes or more difficult quests they're allowed to take. So I think this is really fun, right? That if we as the cook prepare a lot of good meals, our team will win more. They'll complete the quest more. They'll gain more fame. They'll increase resources. Right? We did say that we want sort of an economic system in here that we as the cook can use when we're in the city to purchase things. So we as the cook and as the party can gain more gold and pool more resources. And as they get stronger and better, they'll be able to take on higher level quests, more difficult challenges. That's going to provide us with a great reason to bring in more settings to explore in that round 1 resource collection phase. So let's say, I guess we do have cave already. Well, let's say the group needs to travel to this island to do whatever the quest is. We can get our characters on an island. That may not be as realistic if they're just some low-level, bandit pushers. Who's going to pay for them to sail over to this island and fight whatever or help whoever needs help on that island? But if our party becomes this, countrywide known phenom that they can handle anything, they're the best, then there's reason to do this. So I like that a lot. So with every meal, I just want to think about this again. We are influencing the next day's chance of success directly. Let's add another element. This is what happens when you get to play with a blank page. You just keep creating things. Another element or another variable influenced by the meal, let's say, is our party's morale or party's morale. So not only does the meal directly influence whether or not they'll probably complete the quest the next day. Let's say each character has a certain morale, certain happiness, certain satisfaction, and the meal influences that as well. We could, this is like just going, this is the Inception where we're like 3 levels deep, and I'm trying to explain one point, and then a new idea comes, and then I begin to try to explain that, and a new one comes. So within morale here, I'll backfill after the ideas stop coming. Within the morale, that will be influenced by the meal. So if the meal is great, the character will be more satisfied, vice versa. But it can also be influenced by the quest. Let's say quest completion. So, and we could consider something like character's unique preference. I like that. So within the party's morale, or I should say, rather than the party, it's each character in the party. The meal is going to affect their morale. Whether or not they were successful on their last quest will bump their morale up or down. And then let's also give each character at least one unique preference. So for example, maybe we have a healer in the party who loves poetry. And if we as the cook, or we may need to broaden that name even to be something else, but we as the cook, if we purchase a book of poetry from the last city we're in, or if we complete some minigame to memorize a poem from somebody in the city or a traveler we meet on the road and tell that to the healer, it's going to boost their morale. So why I like that is that it's going to add another layer to our collection phase, where we're not only just prepping for the meal, we're having to keep in mind unique preferences of our characters. And for example, if the knight loves walnuts, and we have the ability to collect some, we may go out of our way to do that rather than prioritize the dinner meal. Say walnuts are not part of the meal. We may go out of our way to prioritize those walnuts rather than the meal and serve a slightly less good meal for the entire party, so that because we got the walnuts for the night. So in other words, we can intentionally boost the knight's morale and have more of an average experience for the rest of the party if we need to. And then like I said, that's the character's unique preference. That gives us more variables to keep in mind. And I think especially for that city phase, or for like encountering travelers on the road. Ooh, I'm in danger here of lifting a great sort of idea from Patrick Rothfuss' The Kingkiller Chronicles, which is these traveling tinkers, these traveling people that just have oodles of goods packed onto their donkey. They're traveling shopping carts, basically. And they make a living going from town to town selling their stuff. I'm super tempted to put something like that in our world here, where it gives us a chance to purchase things from the city, but also when we're on the road. There would be a rare chance to encounter one of these traveling merchants, essentially. And then they would have sort of unique items that may fulfill some of the characters' unique preferences. It gives us a chance to spend gold and to break what could be a kind of an unflavored, consistent feedback loop of, okay, we're in the forest again, time to get some herbs and try to find walnuts. We don't want that to be repetitive. We want to break it up as much as possible. And the more the more varieties of resources or places we can collect resources, the fresher it's going to feel. So if you only get to the forest once every 8 rounds, it's like, oh my gosh, I haven't been here in a while. I need to collect mint. I need rosemary. I need all kinds of things. If you're there every 2 or 3 rounds, it's like, I already have everything I need. Why am I here again? So traveling merchant gives us the chance to purchase unique items and spend gold. Okay. I feel like there was the thread of another idea at character morale. I guess what I didn't say and why I'm including quest completion in the character morale. One, it makes sense, right? If you hit the buzzer beater in the game, you're pretty happy. If you miss it, you're not that happy. But it also adds a level of variance or I should say randomness to the morale. So why is that good? We're playing a little bit of the slots, which I like. I like to incorporate. I'm saying this as if I've created many video games, but I like to incorporate that, or I like to experience that certainly in games, because it always adds that tension or that question mark of, is the RNG, is the random number generator on my side this time? So if we were to strip that out and the character morale is only based off of how good our meal is and whether we can meet any unique preferences, then we know what we're going to get. We make a great meal, we give the knight a walnut, and life is good. But introducing that quest completion, we can influence whether the quest is successful or a failure, right, through our meal. But there's still that level of randomness. So let's say we make a bad meal, and I guess let me clarify this. This is a thought I've had, but I haven't specified. The character morale itself also influences like quest success, and there's a let's just call it like a red zone for now, where if the character's morale falls below a certain point, not only are they extremely unlikely to contribute to the quest, but there is a chance that they'll leave the party. So morale influences quest success. So if morale is at 100%, they have the maximum chance of success. And as morale falls, that's another variable, as well as kind of the meal, that influences quest success. So back to the quest completion contributing to character morale. I like that because let's say we do a great meal, we give the knight the walnut, like I said earlier, but they happen to have failed the previous day's quest. That's going to put a spin on kind of the day's output or the progression. Vice versa, we make a terrible meal. I guess we need to frame this one day in the future. We make a terrible meal, don't hit any unique preferences. We may expect that next day for everything to be bad, and there's probably a good chance that they will fail, but they could still complete the quest. They could be successful, and then actually the morale would be boosted despite our bad, a poor quality meal and that sort of thing. And then vice versa. We can do a good meal in that, but they could still fail. So it adds that level of randomness, which may save you from the morale tanking too much, but it might burn you too sometimes. And that's that random slot element that most players enjoy. We don't want it to be a 50-50 because then it feels like there's no reason to work towards a great meal. It might be like a 90-10 that relatively kind of on a sliding scale, but the bookends of it might be a 90-10, where even if you give a perfect meal, there's still a 10% chance that they're going to tank the quest, assuming it's a quest at their standard level, which is another variable we can play with. I like that, actually. So gameplay mechanic, let's just toss another one in here. Quest selection. So that's going to be another gameplay element where for now, let's just say the party can select their next quest. And you'd be able to see kind of the difficulty and the reward. This is pretty standard. I mean, at least the reward element is pretty standard, that you have some idea of what it is you're going to be given after completing the quest. But I like that because, and let me specify this as well. Actually, I guess I'm not certain of this, but the cook could vote for the quest, like for which quest they should do, or we can assume control of the entire party and choose. So I don't know which way we should go here. We could break from sort of the perspective of the cook and just take control of the party and say, okay, these are the 3 quests. As the player, this is the one I want the team to do. We could do that. Or we can keep leaning into a little bit of that variability, randomness, and only let the player control the cook's vote. So let's say the party is the cook and 4 adventurers. That's 5 votes. I like that because it's harder for the vote to be equal. And the player can only control the cook's vote. So there's maybe 3 or 4 quests that are available, varying difficulty, varying reward, varying location as well, which would, I like that, varying location, because then the cook can be biased towards a location that they need to collect food or characters' unique preference items from. So to go back a step, the player could control the whole party and just choose, or only control the cook's vote and have a 1 in 5 say in where they go. So maybe the player really needs to go to an underground cave or an underground pool, let's say. That could be one of our settings. But the party really wants to go to this castle that's been taken over by bandits. And the cook could get outvoted and have to go there. I'm a little bit torn because that could be unsatisfying, right? You as the player really, if you really want to go to the underground pool, but the game chooses the castle for you, that could be frustrating. And that we don't want player frustration, not even because that's going to distance themselves from the game or make them less likely to play, right? We're not trying to sell this and all of that, but we're trying to make a fun experience, which would indicate that we should strip out all the frustration from the game, but I don't actually think that's true. I think we want some, because if there's frustration, let me rephrase this. If there's too much frustration, that's certainly bad. That's when you play the world's hardest game and where you control a little circle going through these impossible like bullet shooter type things. That's a very frustrating, very difficult game. Same as Elden Ring. But when you do succeed, it's very fun. That's not the baseline we're going for here. We want this to be kind of that warm challenge, maybe even trending towards casual. But if we strip out all frustration, then it feels like there's nothing to play for. If there's no risk, there's no satisfaction in succeeding. So that is to say, let's see, what was I talking about with the reward? Voting for the quest and the frustration. So that does indicate that we could let the characters vote on the setting and the player have a 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 or however many people there are in the party chance of choosing the next quest, because when the party does choose their location, that's going to be great. Like it's going to feel much more satisfying. The question we need to ask is whether the frustration from being outvoted outweighs the satisfaction of getting the location that you want. This is another iteration of playing the slots, where when that quest selection screen comes up, the player knows, okay, this is what I want. There's a chance I'm going to get it, but there's a chance I won't as well. And that can be exciting if it's done well. It can be very frustrating if it's not. Either way, I mean, this isn't a groundbreaking or game-shattering decision, whether the character can choose one way or another. And we're not actually building the game, so this isn't going to burn the bridge down. I think for us, let's say that the cook has a vote. I'm okay introducing that frustration so that there can be more satisfaction when the reward is gained. And we could even say like the party is weighted towards the cook's vote. So whatever the cook votes for, they're more, they being the party, are more invested or more inclined to agree with what the cook said. They may still disagree and outvote, but if there's one vote for the cave and one vote for the castle, that third vote is maybe a little bit more likely to go to the cave. Okay, so that quest selection, I think, is really fun, and that allows us, so I'm trying to think of how this game can serve as many players as possible. Like, what would I really enjoy in this game? What would somebody else really enjoy? And that quest selection helps widen the audience of the game, because you have more control over the direction that your party is progressing in. So let's say, we haven't even talked about achievements yet. I'm just going to add that as a general gameplay mechanic. But if I were a player that wanted to optimize this game as much as possible and complete it, I don't know if there is a completion. We could put a bookend on it and say, this quest, if you can succeed in this quest, you win. But if I were a player that wanted to beat the game or to feel like I optimized it and I really did a great job. One way I would want to do that is through speed. Like, I'm thinking of chess right now. Like, speed and precision are two of the factors that feel like mastery. So how can we do that through the quest selection? If the end goal is to reach a certain status or to beat a certain quest or do whatever, we can fill in the blank there, but it's, something high, something beyond the character's current abilities, then the fastest way to get there is to do the most challenging quests, or to do challenging quests as fast as possible. So we don't want to, we could throw levels on these to make it easier for our conversation, but let's say our characters start at level 1. They could do level 1 quests they could do 5 level 1 quests in a row if they want, and sort of not stagnate, but slowly build up to, level 2, gain some new abilities, discover some new areas. Or if they try to take on a level 2 quest from day 1, that's going to be a big challenge, but their progression is going to be much accelerated over the group that did 5 level 1 quests. Then on day 2, if that secondary group tries to take on a level 3 quest, you can see where this is going. So putting a vote in the hands of the player for that quest selection gives them the chance to try to accelerate that gameplay loop and and feel like they're trying to optimize, like, how fast can I beat the game, so to speak. That's a fun question. There's entire speedrun communities for almost any game you can imagine. Or if the game is not one that it's necessarily speed runnable, if that's a word. I'm thinking of like Stardew Valley here, where that may be a poor example, but that's more of an infinite loop. In Stardew Valley, people might put a time constraint on it. So rather than saying how quickly can I get to X, the question is how much can I do before X? So how much can I do in a certain number of days within the game? That's like a separate measure. That's a separate metric that somebody interested in optimizing can aim for. So even if we don't have that end point in this game, I think maybe we should. But if we don't, there's still the question of how fast can I progress this team, this party, or how strong can I make everybody? How successful can I be within 50 quests or whatever? So that's fun. I mean, I really like how some of this is shaking out. That being said, we have only talked about round 1. Oh my gosh. When I made a comment earlier about, I said something like, I'm still in round 1. I think that was maybe 5 minutes into this episode. I hadn't intended that now, us being an hour in, we would still be discussing round 1 and some of the gameplay mechanics sort of stemming from there. I know we've talked a little bit about dinner, but I have some more thoughts on how that would actually, how that experience would reach the player. I should note, I also added an achievements bullet point to our gameplay mechanics. This is super fun always. For me, I mean, I like having endpoints to shoot for. Maybe the endpoint is make X amount of a certain meal, and it gives you something to drive towards in addition to the morale and the success rate and everything else we've talked about. It gives you specific challenges to aim for. And we can, obviously we would scale some up to be very difficult, scale some down to be easy, pick your first mountain flower. For us today, I don't want to get into the weeds and build out a list of, 50 achievements, but I think that would be really fun. Like for the future or I don't have the ability really to create this game. I am working on a game in Unity right now, but this is echelons above what I could handle. But if this game were really to be made, it would be super, super fun to create achievements. I do want to note as well, like stats are really fun to keep track of. So that would be another kind of gameplay mechanic I would enjoy as a player, and I think a lot of people would. It would be very easy to segment this off from the standard gameplay loop. So some people, if I was an 8-year-old kid, I may not care how many meat pies I've made for the night. I may not care the average morale of my party over time stat. We can fill that in with as many stats as we want, but I may not really care. I might just enjoy looking for a briar of raspberries. I may just enjoy finding something on sale within the city so that I can preserve more of the party's resources. That may be more my focus. So I think for these stats, they should be accessible, but in a menu or somewhere where it's not gonna make you swallow these every day. Like at the end of Stardew Valley, there's a little update screen where it shows you, okay, these are the stats that you progressed in. This is the exact gold that you earned through the day based off of what you sold or whatever. That's not exactly the same as what I'm talking about here. That's not overkill at all, and it feels very good. But if a screen like that were to pop up and say, you made 3 meat pies, now your total meat pies is 103, that feels overwhelming, especially if we're going to have a lot of stats. So I would say the stats should be accessible, but through a menu of some kind so that a player that wants to see them can, a player that doesn't need to. Okay. So that's a lot of gameplay mechanics. I want to go back to our round system and try to build that out a little bit more. So round 1, like we know at this point, is resource collection. So the specific locations we have for that are forest, cave, city, or traveler. And traveler would be, I'm imagining, kind of an ever-present opportunity. So the whole backdrop, right, is this party is a group of adventurers, and they're traveling and they're doing quests. Anywhere they're traveling, presumably they're going on roads, they're traveling, moving somewhere, and there's a chance that they would run into one of these merchants who is on their way between cities, restocking from a coastal village, bringing stuff inland. You name it, these these traveling merchants have to travel. It's part of their job description, I guess. So it makes sense that there would always be a chance that you would run into one. So regardless of what quote unquote location we're in, whether we're in the forest or a cave, prairie, we can flesh that out with 100 places. There'd always be a chance that there is a merchant moving around. Maybe not like within a cave, but if the player were to pop their head out and look around before they go into the cave to start scouting, maybe they would see a merchant moving along. So the merchant is our stand-in for the city. When we're not there, we're able to purchase and that sort of thing. Okay, let's move down to round 2, food prep. So what I'm imagining here is incorporating some precision into the game. So resource collection is okay. So broad scale, what are we trying to do here? I want to incorporate a couple varieties of gameplay loops, a couple different reward systems, so that it keeps things fresh. One example of this is a game. What's it called? Under the Dome, something like that. That's not it. Battle Dome maybe is it. Where you begin each round and you're in a resource collection phase and you're mining. So you're doing this little 2D mining game. You get to drive down, break some blocks, get some resources. And then there's a timer going, which as I'm saying this is sounding more and more like our game. There's a timer of sorts going. And when it runs out, you need to get back to your spaceship that is at the surface of this planet or whatever. And there's some aliens that come to try to destroy your spaceship, and then you got to shoot your little pew pew 2D, arcade gun at them to survive, and then that there's the opportunity to upgrade, and then you repeat that sequence. So why is that fun? it provides some variance, and it breaks up the sequence, which I don't think are the same things, right? We could have variance in mining, like there could be different ways in that game to mine, which would be variance, but it's always mining. It's the same thing, and the player is going to get some flavor fatigue after a while. Even if there's 10 ways to mine, I'm thinking of Minecraft, you can use a pickaxe, you can use TNT, you can use whatever. Even if there's different ways to do it, it's the same end goal, and we need some variety to break that up. Okay, so let's get back to our game here. Food prep. I want this to be more precise, like I said. So resource collection is broader. It's finding things, it's exploration, it's discovery. That's the kind of the core theme. Food prep is going to be more mechanical, I think. So we've got a specific pool, and I'm going to write this down. Specific pool of resources. This is our pantry system. So everything we already had, and plus what we collected in that resource phase, and then we need to make the meal. And I think there's opportunity to develop, or not develop, but to find some fun gameplay mechanics in terms of making the meal. So my thoughts are going back to this old Harry Potter game where you could do alchemy, and you put a couple things in the cauldron and then use your controller and make some circles with the joystick, and that's you stirring the cauldron. It didn't feel world breaking to me. I'm sure there's a lot of mobile games out there that have a similarly basic food production mechanics. What I'm afraid is that we will be in a similar boat here. Thinking more about this, I can see why some of those loops are so basic, because our audience is relatively younger, and not that complexity correlates with age, but I think producing a product more easily probably does correlate more with age. So in other words, if a young player can make the meal easier, then the reward for them is probably more getting the bonus from producing a good meal than mastering the skill of making a difficult meal, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if I phrased that as clearly as it was in my mind. But that being said, if I were to play this, I wouldn't want to just make circles with the joystick to make the meal. That's not really that satisfying to me. But I'm also trying to think, how could we incorporate complexity or difficulty into this without someone needing a VR headset, what's it called, augmented reality, and go into their kitchen and actually make something. One idea that's coming to mind is that we can differentiate the complexity from the gameplay mechanics to the kind of thought process. And before I lay that out, let me just add another note here that we can differentiate difficulty. So for that, I'm thinking if a young player were to do this, and if they do just want to move the joystick in a circle to stir the soup, that's fine. Let's make an easy difficulty. Let's let them stir the pot and not skip the food prep step, but make it much more accessible. We can have a standard or a difficult difficulty where it incorporates, more mechanical elements. But I think that to be able to differentiate the difficulty is good. The other thought I had, and let me go back to that, is to differentiate where the complexity falls. So it wouldn't just have to be on the mechanics of making the meal. I'm trying to think of how this would intertwine with a young player that doesn't really want complexity, but let me just specify what I was thinking. If we differentiate the complexity so that some of it falls on the meal, how to phrase this, on understanding how to make the meal rather than the act of making it. So if we build some difficulty into, let's say we give the reader a recipe card or some kind of recipe, like in Minecraft, like in 7 Days to Die, like in any game like that, where they know what ooh. Okay, I think we're getting closer. I'll finish that thought. So the player knows how to make it, and then they have to go and do the actual act of making it. That's one way we can differentiate the complexity. And like I said earlier, I didn't know how that would connect to a young player, but I think this is it. So recipe card. Let's just say like easy version and complex version. So this would be variable based on whether the player wanted, an easier experience or the more complex experience. The easy would be the recipe card just tells you how to make like the meal or whatever. Complex. So let's finish easy first, I guess. So let's say they're making a meat pie. It may say to prepare a crust, prepare a broth, and then meat, and then it may give you the exact spices to include in that, and then like how long to cook it. This would be a little bit of a difficult meal for the trail, but let's just use that as an example. So it would tell you everything you need. So there would be no question marks. It would tell you the order, any timings that would be necessary, maybe have some tips in there. So it would reduce the act of understanding how the meal has to be made. And then with that easier build loop of actually making the meal, it wouldn't be that difficult to actually make it. The complex card, let's say it has like ingredients, has most ingredients or some ingredients, but not really in order to like how to make things, and no like I'll just say extra information to be broad. So with this, I'm thinking of like if you ever got an old recipe card from your grandma or something, and it was how to make a certain pudding or a certain pan of bars or whatever, and it's got a list of about 8 ingredients at the top. There's no measurements and there's no instructions. It's the question of how do I mix this up so that it turns out right. So what that would do, that complex recipe or that complex difficulty, would make that food prep round more difficult because the player has to try to understand, okay, if I'm making this food, how do I make it? Like, okay, these are the ingredients. I feel like there should maybe be some extra spice in there. Like, there's no spices listed. There needs to be some probably. What kind should I put in there? There's few oh gosh, what's the word? Few proportions. I don't know how much flour or how much broth to put into this or whatever. So we add a lot of complexity, and that's going to build a satisfying. So this is back to that question of frustration versus satisfaction at completing the difficult task. And obviously how that feeds in is there's going to be more frustration with this complex recipe card meal prep model because there's much more of a chance to fail. If the character adds in mint instead of rosemary, that's going to have a big influence on how the soup turns out. But there's much more reward, because as you learn how to as you learn how to make the meal, and as you learn specifically what your characters like, you know how to do that in the future. And it's always rewarding to do something that you weren't able to do previously. So I like that a lot, and I think that kind of fleshes out our food prep round. We really don't have specifics on that differentiated difficulty for making the meal. I think we've got a great start on that recipe card item. These cards would be things you could purchase from the city, from traveling merchants. The cook could just, the player could just do something themselves. Like they wouldn't need to follow a card. And I actually really like that idea, because I'm going to write that down before I forget. Player can create recipe from scratch. Not bound to card. And I really like this. This would be devilish from a game development perspective to figure out how to code this to characters' satisfaction. But this would be so fun as a player to be able to just make something from scratch, not to be bound to, okay, I have to put in 3 drupals of bone broth into this because that's what the recipe card says. But to be able to just make something and then to see what your what your party thinks of it. I would have a hoot doing that. That's basically what I do in the kitchen anyway. Okay, so like I was saying, that's kind of the food prep. We've got a great handle on how we can differentiate the experience for users with the understanding the recipe phase. And I guess what I didn't even say in there is that regardless of whether, let's think about this for a second. Another element to that food prep would be choosing the meal in the first place, right? The recipe card doesn't just pop out of the box and say, "Hey, it's my turn tonight." So I'm thinking in that easy version, maybe we would just have a recipe card be selected. I do kind of like that, recipe card selected. And that would feed it into the like the resource collection loop and all that kind of stuff, because if it said this is the recipe that you should make tonight, and it's geared towards already what you have in the pantry and what you can collect that day, then the player doesn't need to do the mental work of scanning their pantry, sort of combining that with what they could get from the day's collection, and then from that determining what recipe would make the most sense, coupled with their character's preferences and varying morale levels. Specifically, like if they need to really boost one character's morale, they need to make a food that character will really enjoy. In the easy mode, just giving the player the recipe that is kind of most optimal for all those things takes out that mental work. So I do really like that from the easy perspective. And then the complex, the character would have to do all that legwork that I just kind of walked through, which is really fun. And as I was saying it, it's like, wow, there are a lot of things to consider here, especially if we have that timer running during the resource collection. It's like, wow, how do you keep track of all those things? How do you do the actual collection, which, should be a fun gameplay loop in itself, that slots machine discovery, opening the treasure chest moment. So I like that a lot. And let me just add that note in here. Complex has most ingredients, but not really instructions to make things. No extra information. And it doesn't choose recipe card that morning. Okay, I've taken a couple of shots at explaining this point, and new ideas keep coming up. So let me go back again, to the actual act of making the meal. We talked about the easy way, which is probably some combination of button mashing and, swirling the joystick. I don't know how we make a complex, difficult mechanic for making the meal. That's not really our focus today. Our focus is more on, the structure of the game. If this were a game that someone was actually making, the game devs would have to sit down and really live into this question of how do we create a complex, difficult mechanic to make the meal. I kind of feel like just slipping past it and leaving it as a placeholder for later. So let's go ahead and do that. I do want to try to keep this relatively quickly moving, which we'll see how that always goes. Okay, so some great gameplay mechanics. I really like that food prep round, especially from the morale balancing perspective. The differentiation we have in difficulty, I think, is really nice there. Lets different users, different players enjoy this as much as they can. The creativity that we allow players to create something from scratch is really fun, and then to see how their party reacts to it, I think, is equally fun. And I'm going to add this would be a nice loop. That what they create from scratch may be something new, and there's potential to create like a new favorite with their characters, right? So their characters already have those like unique favorites of different things. But since the player is creating something relatively new, there's a potential to create a new favorite, which would be huge. And if it's a good recipe, this is something the player could sell, right? Player can sell. If it's good, think about, I'm thinking about in Skyrim, you can purchase recipes for typically alchemical potions. The potions that improve various stats and that sort of thing. And they can be expensive. So if the player were to stop at an inn and they have this new recipe for, side of lamb, or let's say, side of lamb with cranberries and walnuts, sort of, what's the term? Not filled. What is it called? Stuffed into the lamb, then maybe the innkeeper, is pay a pretty penny for that, and that's resources that can be used to accelerate the team growth or to collect a unique item. Oh, that'd be a whole nother thing. Let's build onto our pantry system a little bit and say that there can be not only food that the character, the player is collecting and prioritizing. There's also equipment that the character gets. Now, I want to be a little careful here because I do feel that this is moving a little bit more towards that RPG style where the character is improving themselves. But I think we're far enough away from the character's improvement being, right, like if the cook were to get a bigger pot to make more soup or a fancy knife to whatever. If we give the character better and more equipment, the effect is not that they're better, but that they improve the party more. Tangentially, not themselves. They themselves are not really the mover. It's what they're creating with their tools for other people. So that's probably still distant enough from RPG that it won't feel like we're in the same ruts as that genre, while also giving us a little bit of the flavor of the player having the satisfaction of I got the new toy, or I got the new shiny thing that I get to use when I'm playing now. So we could flesh out what equipment the player could get. I'm not really focused on that right now. I kind of want to keep going through the round loop and see what other general ideas come to mind. So round 3 dinner, what I'm thinking here is that I want to introduce more variance, right? We could easily end the gameplay loop after the food prep and just cut to a scene where it says, your players enjoyed the meal. This was the effect it had on the morale for the day. So like a Stardew Valley end of day screen. We could cut right to that from the time the meal is done and restart at the resource collection phase, or segue into the quest selector probably, and then segue into the resource collection phase and repeat. And that gives us kind of 2 meta loops for the game, right? The resource collection and food prep. And then in a smaller category, I would put like inventory management and party management. But I feel like there's something we can do in this dinner phase that would give us a 3rd meta loop for the game. And that would kind of keep things fresher, right? 3 variables, three big like gameplay loops, I think is enough that when you get back to square one, it feels like square one, and it's not like, okay, I was just here. So what could we do in dinner that would be satisfying, that would build on some of our themes? One idea would be like a storytelling thing. This is something I would enjoy. I'm thinking of The Name of the Wind and The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss. Excellent novels, and one of my favorite elements within them is that there's a very heavy emphasis on the campfire storytelling, where the characters are sitting around. It's a non-event in the plot, essentially. It's a breath from whatever is supposed to be happening, and they just tell a story. And it's something that I would say maybe a lesser author would have cut scenes and jumped right from action A to action B, but putting in that breath and giving the story and the reader a moment to rest and to hear something different is really powerful. And it, like I said, it's one of my favorite elements in those novels. There's maybe 10 or so of those campfire stories that are told across both of the books, and they're superb. It really builds a deeper levels to the world. And then, like I said, it's kind of a variance from banging the drums of action. So storytelling is potential. I'm a little bit concerned that it's different enough from the open world food prep mechanics that there might be some readers that don't care about reading a 2-3 page story. They just want to get back to combing the forest and finding herbs and that sort of thing. What else could we do other than storytelling? There could be another mechanical element to the story of serving the meal, and that sort of thing. I'm really not interested in that, I think. Right, the mechanical element, and what I mean by mechanical is like a gameplay element that requires precision and skill to some degree. Right, in a first-person shooter, this would be like aiming your weapon and learning how to dodge and all that kind of thing. In Elden Ring, it would be dodging and similarly using your weapon, understanding the enemy. So I don't want too many mechanical things in here. If our theme is going to be that this game is trending more towards the casual player rather than something intense, which it has to, I think, with our backdrop of Cook, these are some gentle themes we're handling here. I don't want too many cooks to ruin the soup here, too many mechanical details. And I want something distinct enough from resource collection and the food prep that it can stand on its own, it can be satisfying on its own, and that it adds to what we already have. So storytelling is an option. If we do that, I think it has to be in the manner of Skyrim, in the manner of the books within Skyrim, which is one of the most brilliant gameplay mechanics I've ever experienced. One of my very favorites. For those that haven't played, I would love to do a whole episode on Skyrim and just explore some of the concepts at work and why I enjoyed it so much. But I guess simply put, it's an open world game. It's an RPG. You get to explore, do things, have fun. And in this massive world, in most locations you go to, there are bookshelves. And on the bookshelves are books that you can interact with. You can move your focus, your cursor from book to book, and a different title will appear. You can select any book within the entire world, open it up, and read it. And these aren't novel length, but they're a couple pages. Some of them are, up to like 10 pages, a couple thousand words. And they're on any topic you can think of. So world history within Skyrim, little stories, myths, informational tidbits that can help you within the game. Just any information you can imagine within the setting of Skyrim. There's probably a book sitting on a shelf somewhere, and if you can find it, you can read it, literally read it, and learn more about the game. One of the things that's most appealing about that structure is that there's that knowledge everywhere. And for somebody like me that really enjoyed finding specific books within the game, it becomes a mini game of, okay, here's a bookshelf. Can I find, for example, one of my favorite ones is The Black Arrow, is the name of this short story within one of the books within Skyrim. Can I find The Black Arrow so that I can read it? And when I do, I can take the book and then put it in my house in Skyrim so that I can read it later. So the books become a mini game for players that want to read and want to learn more about the world. For characters that don't care about that, they never have to open a book in the whole game. So there's that option of time investment from the player that they get to choose. If we do storytelling at dinner here, essentially where we're sharing more about the world, or maybe providing gameplay information, like stuff that would be helpful to the player, such as, hey, I heard this. I heard from a traveling merchant that was heading to the nearby city that they have I don't know, invent something that the king's minstrels are traveling through that city, and there's going to be music and all that kind of thing. Then in the quest selector piece, like the next phase, the cook might be more inclined to select that they go to the city because they know everyone's morale is going to get boosted by that music. So that might outweigh voting for going to the forest where the cook needs something specific. They may choose to go to the city because they know the minstrels will be there and that's going to improve morale. So we could, I guess the summary of that is that we could plant important information in some of that story time that would benefit the player. This is the equivalent of putting helpful gameplay mechanics in the Skyrim books. More than that, though, I would like the story time or storytelling phase, this dinner phase, I should say, to focus on actual stories. Like, have a pool of 100 or 200 little short stories that are really entertaining, that are based in this world, that add depth and complexity and knowledge to it. That the the player can enjoy and also feel like they're learning something valuable about the world. So maybe there's a story about a foreign traveler that, I guess, invent the rest of the story. But the key part of that is that in that, humorous, cute, tragic, whatever little story, the player is going to learn more about that foreign person's culture, what they like. Maybe there's certain recipes that are mentioned in the story. Maybe there's specific plants or herbs or combinations of things that are described. And if down the road that cook needs to prepare food for someone of that culture, or wants to prepare food of that culture for their party, they're equipped to. So the primary focus should be entertainment, I think, at that dinner. But it may also add some knowledge for the player that they can use down the line. I think we could find a couple more facets to storytelling of like why it may be helpful. My main worry is that will just become a what's it called? Like a cutscene for younger, well, not necessarily younger, but just players in general that don't want to listen to or read a 3-minute little story. So I don't want it to be a cutscene. I want it to bring value, ideally to everybody that would play it. So what would be another option or things we could do at dinner that would be entertaining? We could choose this time for our economy management. So this could be the time where the player sorts through their pantry, maybe compares prices of different products in different cities, and uses that to inform their decision of where they should go the next day. In other words, this could be the breath that the player gets, where they get to look around and decide, okay, what am I doing tomorrow? I think I like that. I think I would like that better to happen at night, right? We can have that cutscene where it shows, okay, this is the morale slider for every character. Great job, everybody's went up. And maybe that's all that's on that screen. And then there could be the ability for the player to think for a while, have as much time as they want. Think about, what do I want to do tomorrow? What meal should I make? Where should I vote for us to go? Yeah, just the typical party management sort of thing. So that'll be round 4. Night will be that party management untimed phase. We're back to round 3, dinner. Storytelling is an option. What could it be? This could be, actually, let's think about this. This would be different. This would be right when the party gets back from their quest. So this is when we'd hear about previous quest. So we'd hear about the previous day's quest, right, that we'd prepped them for and all that kind of stuff. And also we'd see all the spoils or the rewards from the quest. Now I was going to say this could be a similar party management moment where, okay, if the group got X number of dragon scales, if they got some bone meal from some skeletons or whatever, this could be where the cook organizes everything, does some inventory management. Again, I think I'd like that after dinner. I think I'd like that to be kind of the night phase where we just have a black screen and the player can breathe and think and situate themselves for the next day. That sounds a lot more satisfying to me. But I do like that we hear from the party about how the previous quest went. That would kind of be a natural thing to discuss while they're eating. And then I'm just going to move the see rewards from quest down into the night phase. So that's part of our party management. Okay, back to round 3, dinner, storytelling. What else could there be? What would be fun? And part of what I'm thinking here is that we can't make a shoe that's going to fit everybody. Right? Think of like the most successful games. They don't always correlate with like a wider audience. I'm thinking of Elden Ring as an example. I think it won the game of the year in whatever year it launched, maybe 2019 or 2020 or something. I don't remember, but it's hard to think of a more niche game than that. I mean, it's certainly on the seesaw of niche to general. It's heavily niche. It's a fail-oriented game where the player fails and fails and fails and then eventually maybe succeeds. It is within the large kind of mansion of RPG, medieval open world. Like those are all big places that a game can live in. But the huge parameter of like the whole Dark Souls gaming franchise's backbone is that difficulty aspect, and that's going to cut off 75% of players that would otherwise probably be open to the RPG open world medieval backdrop. And that didn't bother Elden Ring at all. Like I said, it was the most popular game, or won the Game of the Year award, whatever. Very successful. So, I guess the lesson I'm considering drawing from that is that it may be okay to do the storytelling at dinner and to leave it a cutscene and let people that don't want to listen to it just skip, and let people that do want to listen to that and get a little bit of a perspective on the game, on the world, they can listen to that. And if 40% of our readers say, I don't really care about listening to a little story, I just want to get back to picking flowers in the forest, that's fine. So I think, yeah, let's stick with storytelling. I mean, that's what I would really enjoy in a game. And from a development perspective, I think it'd be so fun to come up with, a little laundry list of 200 little stories that are based around a world like this. So let's go back to square one and just walk through what a day in this game would look like. I did not think this is where the podcast would be going today. I figured maybe we'd try to reinvent the POW world, Pokemon, animal collection type genre, or maybe to do a little bit of an open world, I guess this is open world, but RPG style game or something like that, deck builder, but we went in a very different direction, which is how these things often go. Okay, so let's wrap up here and just kind of rewind through our game. So we have a round-based game set within an open world. Round 1 is resource collection. So this is dependent on what setting we were in from our previously selected quest. So whether we're in the forest, a cave, a city, any number of other places we could invent and really build that out. But we're in a setting with unique plants, unique fish, and herbs and those sorts of things to collect. Well, I better add this in quick while I'm thinking of it. I want to add into this resource collection phase potential to find valuable things. So we're not only focused on finding food for dinner, right? That's kind of a singular focus. And though there can be a lot of subcategories within that, I think it's fun to keep another variable in mind. So I want to add the potential for the player to find valuable things, or just to find things, and then sell those later, use them later somehow. So these may be like valuable stones or gems, maybe I should say. specific plants that maybe an apothecary would really care about, something like that, or like to collect an animal or something. These would be things that if I were a player and I knew, okay, I'm going to this town, or our party is trending towards this city, let me do a little bit of research and see what does this city really value. Like maybe they really value a very particular plant that is not, like, doesn't grow near them. But if I can collect it here a couple days journey away and bring it there, it's going to be 10 times the price of if I were to just sell it to a traveling merchant. So, okay, so we just added that into the resource collection phase. I think that'd be really fun. It keeps playing on the slot machine theme we have of, ooh, look what I found, and can I sell that and get some shinies for it. Okay, so from the top again, round 1 is resource collection. We're able to search for valuable things that we can leverage later, or I should say, and primarily we're looking for specific things that we can use for dinner that night and to build a meal that is going to satisfy and support our party. There's a handful of locations that the collection can take place in, each with their own plants, their own maybe valuable items that are available, all that kind of thing. So each place that the player is searching in should feel fresh, it should feel different, and there should be enough variability that there's a reason to go to one over the other. So after we go through that collection phase, either timed or not, depending on our difficulty, we get into round 2, which is a food prep. So we're back at the camp now. Our party is not there with us, it's just us, the cook. And we're able to look in our pantry, which maybe isn't the most precise word, right? We're on the road traveling, so we don't have an actual pantry. This would be whatever food is kind of kept in travel sacks and those sorts of things. But we're able to look in our pantry and see, okay, this is the stockpile of goods, of food that I already have. This is what I just collected for the day. Hopefully I got everything I need to make the meal that I had chosen, if I'm doing the complex difficulty. After we've taken a moment to look at all the food and opportunities or possibilities we have, we're into the actual meal making. So here, again, it depends on whether we're doing kind of the easy mode or the standard mode. Easy, it would give us the recipe card, which is going to explain everything we need to do, all the food we need, proportions, ingredients, and tell us the exact order of everything. If we're doing the standard version, we are going to get an incomplete card. So it tells us some of the ingredients, maybe not. Does not give us maybe all the proportions or the instructions for preparing. And then we move into the actual mechanical act of making the meal. Again, this will be differentiated by difficulty. It may be as simple as stirring a soup pot, or a more complex mechanic that we would try to build out later, if we were to really, make this game. The player also has the opportunity, or the, again, I guess I'm flipping those words around, has the possibility to create their own recipe from scratch. This would probably be difficult to code. It would have to be based off of the main constituents of the ingredients. Maybe there could be some like variables for texture and those sorts of things that, when combined, would, there could be certain non-combinations, if that's a word, of, it's bad to combine these things pretty much all the time. But anyway, mechanics aside, the player can create a recipe from scratch, which their party would enjoy or not, depending on how well it matches up to their preferences. The player could then sell this recipe card if it's a good one, or I guess even if it's a bad one. The player could sell this recipe card as another opportunity to increase resources for the party. That food prep, or the actual, I guess let's keep going through the rounds and then we'll hit the gameplay mechanics. Round 3 is dinner, where we're going to do a storytelling aspect. So this would be a cutscene that the player could skip through. Cutscene's maybe not the right word. This isn't probably going to be a big cinematic thing, but text that the player could read, or audio if we're fancy. text that the player could read or skip through if they choose, but it would be a story about the world that this is set in. It would add some texture and some flavor to the world, so some important information potentially that the player could use down the line. Maybe would help them in bargaining, or we could fill the list of minor benefits that the stories would give. And then here the party also gets back from their quest that day. We hear how it went, and then we transition into round 4, which is the night phase. So this is more inventory management, player taking a breath, resetting for the next day. So they're able to look at kind of the rewards from the quest, inventory of the party, and also take part in the quest selector for the next day, where the player has a chance or a vote in where the party is going, what they're gonna, where they're going, and what the reward is for completing the quest of a certain difficulty. And then, like I said, some party inventory management of, okay, this is where the morale is for everybody. This is what I would need to focus on for tomorrow. These are some valuable items we just got. Does it make sense to go to a city now, or should we continue collecting resources and try to do a bigger sell later on? So just general question time and take a breath. Couple gameplay mechanics that are baked into the round system we have. Pantry system is going to have our food and any equipment our character has. So we do have a self-progression element for our cook, that they can get better cooking equipment, better collecting things, all of that sort of thing. And play a little bit into the RPG genre. Our party members have varying food preferences, so the knight may like meat more, an elven archer may like more greens and light food and bread and that kind of thing. This is what the character or the player is going to have to keep in mind as they're choosing their recipes, as they're collecting things, is what's the best possible meal I can make for my entire party that's going to keep morale high, improve chances of success, all of that. Which is essentially our next gameplay mechanic here, that the team is successful to the degree that they're satisfied, or maybe I guess since we created the morale metric, they're successful to the degree of their morale. So a happier team is going to be more successful in their quests, vice versa. In giving them the meals, there's also a long-term stat evolution that can take place, where their various attributes will increase with each meal or decrease potentially, and then that's going to improve or decrease their baseline chance of success in the future for a quest of that difficulty. There's also a scaling or a vertical element to the party's success, where the more successful they are, the more difficult quests they're able to do, the more their fame spreads. They're allowed to take higher level quests with more rewards, greater chance of failure maybe, but as they're getting stronger, they're able to take that on. Specifically, the character morale is influenced by a couple of things. One is the meal. That's kind of the direct corollary. Another is quest completion. So depending on if the quest that day was successful or not, their morale will fluctuate accordingly. This is like secondarily connected to the meal, because the meal is affecting the quest's chance of success. So we kind of get like a little bit of a double whammy there with having a good or bad meal. And then also the character's unique preferences will play a role in their morale for that day. So if we can provide an experience or a food that the character specifically really likes, that's going to have a boost to their morale. There's a quest selection phase where the player has a 1 in however many vote to determine where the party goes the next day. Again, this introduces a little bit of randomness, that the player doesn't get to be the hand of God and just choose. They need to, they have to get a little bit lucky to go where they want, and they may be thwarted a little bit by their party. There's going to be some stats which would be accessible through a menu, so they're not weighing down players that don't really care about how many meat pies they've made, but they're available for a player like me that is interested in some of those meaningless little fun things. And then we would also build out some achievements as well to give the player some specific points to drive towards and have some satisfaction in doing scaled difficulty, or I guess in improving the difficulty they can handle, completing more difficult things. Achievements are a fun way to give a little carrot for that. So that's our game. I had a lot of fun laying this out. Was, like I said, was not the game that I envisioned, but I'm glad it's one that we kind of arrived at together. I think there's some really fun feedback loops in here, some interesting interesting loops, and a game that I would like to play. It tickles a lot of the places that of games I enjoy with that resource collection open world element. There's quite a bit of strategy involved, which is pretty agreeable in almost any game. And then there's that progression over a long time frame, which is kind of the hallmark of RPG in quite a few games. So thanks for listening and for kind of helping build this game with me. I hope you appreciated it, and I will see you on the next page.